Good evening. Welcome, everyone, to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Jean Shaheen. I'm the director at the Institute of Politics. We're the people who bring you the forum, and we have a very exciting forum for you tonight. This year, the forum has hosted a variety of speakers who have addressed one of the most critical issues facing us today, the war on terror. Here in the forum, we've heard from General John Abizaid, former President Mohammad Khatami of Iran, the Director of National Intelligence, John Negroponte, and recently, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, among many others. And tonight, we're going to hear from another influential voice, FBI Director Robert Mueller. Director Mueller will discuss an aspect of the war on terror that has been hotly debated in this country, and that is how America balances civil liberties and national security. To introduce our guests this evening, we are pleased to have one of the fellows at the Institute of Politics, James Baker. Now, for those of you who are fortunate enough to have attended Jim's study group, you know that he has a sign on his door that says, "Not that James Baker." However, Jim is a formidable figure in his own right. He is a former federal prosecutor and has worked on all aspects of national security investigations and prosecutions. In 2006, Jim received the George H.W. Bush Award for Excellence in Counterterrorism, the CIA's highest award for counterterrorism achievements. He is currently on leave from his position as Counsel for Intelligence Policy at the U.S. Department of Justice, and this semester he has led an engaging study group in national security, law, and policy. Please welcome our very own Jim Baker.
Thank you, Governor Shaheen. It's been a pleasure to be here. It's been a wonderful semester, and I've enjoyed myself thoroughly, so thank you for this opportunity. I am finishing up my semester and my study group, and when I told the IOP that I wanted to bring Director Mueller here as a study group speaker, they thought about it and decided that I would need a room a bit bigger than the IOP conference room down the hallway here. So here we are in the forum with all of you tonight. It is my honor to introduce Robert Mueller, the Director of the FBI. President George W. Bush nominated Director Mueller to that position, and he was sworn in on September 4th, 2001, just a week before 9/11. And I actually remember watching or seeing Director Mueller walking to the FBI his first day at work, his first day on the job, by himself, unescorted, down Pennsylvania Avenue. And as we know, in many ways, that time was a very different era before 9/11. After receiving his undergraduate degree from Princeton and his master's degree in international relations from New York University, Director Mueller joined the U.S. Marine Corps. He served as a Marine officer for 3 years and led a rifle platoon of the 3rd Marine Division in Vietnam for 1 year. He completed the Army's Ranger and Airborne programs, and for his service he received the Bronze Star, 2 Navy Commendation Medals, the Purple Heart, and other awards. Following his career in the Marine Corps, Director Mueller earned his law degree from the University of Virginia Law School. In 1982, he moved to Boston as an assistant United States attorney, where he investigated and prosecuted major financial fraud, terrorism, narcotics, and public corruption cases. After serving as a partner at the Boston law firm of Hill and Barlow, Director Mueller was again called to public service. In 1989, he returned to the Department of Justice and served first as an assistant to Attorney General and former IOP Director Dick Thornburgh, and then as Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division. And he was, in that position, my first boss at the Department of Justice. He returned to private practice for a short time, and then once again came back to the department as an Assistant United States Attorney in Washington, D.C., prosecuting homicide cases. Director Mueller has also served as a United States Attorney under President Clinton and as Acting Deputy Attorney General under President Bush. So therefore, Director Mueller has been appointed to important positions at the Department of Justice by 3 presidents, both Republican and Democrat. As his record reflects, Director Mueller has devoted his professional life to the service of his country. He has done so during times of peace and times of war. And he has done so most notably in the 5.5 years since 9/11 at the helm of an organization that is so critical to protecting both the safety and freedom of all Americans, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We all owe him a huge debt of gratitude for his dedicated service to the nation, and I personally consider myself lucky to have worked with and for Director Mueller in a variety of capacities over the years. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Director of the FBI, Robert Mueller.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim, for that very kind introduction. There was a point in time where you had to say those kind words because you worked for me. You no longer do, so I especially appreciate them. And I want to thank you for having me here this evening for this dialogue. It's great to be back in Boston. John F. Kennedy once described Washington as a city of southern efficiency and northern charm. I think it was a bit hard on the north. There's something very comforting in being back among Boston's many charms, starting with the Dunkin' Donuts on every corner, seeing the glares directed at those who dare to wear those Yankee caps, and finally, hearing every fifth word modified by wicked. But today I want to spend some time talking about the FBI's role in the relationship between freedom on the one hand and security on the other. In particular,
Justice for Herman Bell! Free the Panther 8! Free all political prisoners! Justice for Herman Bell!
as I say, I want to talk about the balance between national security and civil liberties.
Terrorism waged by the FBI against peaceful political dissidents. We will never forget, and we will never forgive. We will never forget the role of the FBI in McCarthyism. We will never forget the role of the FBI in the murders of peaceful political dissidents.
I want to say that
Close Guantanamo and the lies and the secrets! Close Guantanamo and the roundup and the detentions! Stop the lies! Stop the secrets! Close Guantanamo!
I want to say
Stop the green scare! Stop the FBI!
that I can think
Stop the green scare!
this is one of the great things about the United States. This is one of the great things about America, and indeed, one of the great things about Boston, in that persons are not afraid to express their views. And should have the opportunity to do so. I do want to say that I can think of no more fitting place to talk about this, and to talk about this subject than the John F. Kennedy School of Government. President Kennedy certainly was one of freedom's greatest champions, but also one of freedom's greatest orators. And exactly 46 years ago tomorrow, President Kennedy delivered a speech to the American Newspaper Publishers Association. In that speech, he discussed the delicate balance between the need to keep the public informed through freedom of the press and the need to keep the public secure through limiting the amount of information made available to America's enemies. America was deep in the Cold War, facing unprecedented threats, and in President Kennedy's words, our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe, and the survival of our friends is in danger. 2 generations later, we find ourselves in the midst of another fierce struggle. And once again, our way of life is under attack, and our enemies are advancing around the globe. And once again, we must confront the question of how to properly balance the protection of American lives with the protection of American liberties. It is the FBI's mission to protect both, and we do. But before I do discuss what the FBI is doing to protect our freedom, let me first address the gravest threat to our way of life, and that is the threat of terrorism. Since the September 11th attacks, the FBI has worked closely with law enforcement and intelligence communities to prevent another attack. And we have made substantial progress. Working together, we have dismantled terrorist camps overseas, detected terrorist cells here at home. We have disrupted terrorist communications and finances, and we have diminished the leadership and the command structures of groups such as Al-Qaeda. And so far, we have been successful in preventing another attack on our homeland. And yet, we are still not safe. And I do not say this to be an alarmist. The reality is that although we have grown accustomed here to feeling secure on our own soil, terrorists have successfully attacked other nations, and they still want to attack us. We cannot afford to become complacent. Terrorists are not likely to go into another line of work. Recent intelligence underscores al-Qaeda's resilience. They are seeking out new sanctuaries for recruiting and training, and they are promoting from within, and they are using seasoned operatives to plan attacks around the world. There is no country, there is no community that is immune. And the threat stretches from Bali to right here in Boston. Remember, on the morning of September 11th, 2001, 10 of the hijackers passed through Logan Airport. Terrorists do not need massive armies now to cause massive carnage, but only a few faithful followers. They no longer need a single leader preaching a message of hate, but an ideology that can be spread on the internet. They no longer need al-Qaeda subsidies or advanced technology, but a small amount of money they can raise themselves and bombs they can detonate through the use of cell phones. Terrorists have global ambitions and global reach. And one of the unintended consequences of damaging al-Qaeda's hierarchy is that the remaining members and the newest acolytes are dispersed around the globe. Al-Qaeda is no longer just an organization, it is a movement. And its followers may have no formal affiliation with Al-Qaeda, but may be inspired by its message of violence. And we are worried now, not just about new sanctuaries emerging overseas, but also about pockets of concern in our own neighborhoods. For instance, we have already discovered homegrown cells from Ohio to Oregon, from Lackawanna, New York, to Northern Virginia. And it is the FBI's mission to protect America from these threats and from many other threats, including threats to civil rights and civil liberties. And now some have suggested that there is an inherent conflict between protecting national security on the one hand and protecting civil liberties on the other. But I beg to disagree. We have a right to privacy, but we also have a right to ride the T to work without bombs exploding. And we in the FBI are sworn to protect both national security and civil liberties. And it is not a question of conflict, it is a question of balance. If we safeguard our civil liberties, but leave our country vulnerable to terrorist attack, then we have lost. If we protect America from terrorism, but sacrifice our civil liberties, we have lost. We must strike a balance. This is not a new concept. We have all heard Ben Franklin's assessment. They who would give up an essential liberty for temporary security deserve neither liberty nor security. But as the guardian of both, the FBI is in the middle of this debate. So how do we try to guarantee both? And I can tell you that we struggle with this question day in and day out. Let me give you a hypothetical scenario. Let's say that while investigating last year's plot to blow up airliners bound for the United States, the British authorities discovered the terrorists there had called a phone number in the United States. Our immediate concern would be to find out who those British terrorists had been talking to here and why. So we would check that US phone number against our databases. And here we must walk the line between investigating a possible connection to a plot in the United States and respecting privacy on the other hand. Yes, it's possible the terrorists had just dialed an innocent acquaintance here in the United States, but can we take that risk? Would you want us to take that risk? And what if we are wrong? Well, let's go on and say that we discovered the phone number here in the United States is registered to someone we believe is a suspected terrorist. What next should we do? In the post-9/11 world, we cannot afford to let any counterterrorism lead go unaddressed. The next logical step is to find out who else in the United States the subject has been talking to. And so we would use a national security letter to obtain this individual's phone records. But this is typically where privacy concerns again arise. Subject might have been calling a number of innocent individuals, might have been calling for a pizza, might have been calling to request a cab or a chat with a coworker. But on the other hand, that individual here in the United States may have been talking to somebody who is part of a terrorist cell. If we look at who the subject called, we may be criticized for accessing information about innocent Americans. But if we do not take a closer look by examining those phone records, we risk missing a key piece of evidence. And should an attack occur, we would most certainly be condemned, and rightly so, for not connecting the dots that could have foiled this attack. And here it is important to remember three things. One, the communications are the lifeblood of terrorism. Secondly, in my example, we are not accessing the content of those telephone calls. It's the record of the phone being used. And three, we can quickly use this piece of investigative material to exclude the unrelated phone numbers and focus only on those that raise red flags. From there, we can start to piece together the puzzle bit by bit without knowing what picture will eventually emerge. Now, I pose this as a hypothetical example because I cannot discuss the details of ongoing investigations. Suffice it to say that many of the real scenarios that we investigate are not far from this example. Often what they have in common is a potentially serious threat, limited intelligence, and a limited time frame within which to act. And with each unique investigation, we wrestle with the same questions. Have we struck the right balance between security and freedom? Did we take every reasonable step? And what if we didn't peel back that last layer that would have revealed a terrorist plot? I can tell you, unfortunately, our work is not like an episode of Law and Order, where one clue leads effortlessly to the next and a complex investigation can be wrapped up and successfully prosecuted all within 1 hour. Intelligence is not smooth. Most often it is piecemeal. A name here, a telephone number there. My counterpart in the UK, Dame Eliza Manningham-Buller, the head of Britain's domestic intelligence agency until recently, MI5, puts it this way, and I quote, "Often difficult decisions need to be made on the basis of intelligence which is fragmentary and difficult to interpret. Some is gold, some dross, and all of it requires validation, analysis, and assessment. When it is gold, it shines and illuminates, saves lives, protects nations, and informs policy. We in the FBI are looking for the gold amid the dross. Our focus is on obtaining that information which helps protect America. And we ensure that we collect intelligence appropriately in three ways: through training, through oversight, and through adherence to the law. First, training. Before FBI agents receive their guns and badges, they go through 21 weeks of rigorous training in our academy at Quantico. They take courses not just in conducting surveillance and interviewing witnesses, but in lawfully opening investigations and gathering evidence. They learn not just the technique of making an arrest, but the legal basis for doing so and the constitutional protections afforded to each suspect. And to make sure they fully understand the magnitude of their oath to defend the Constitution, every new FBI agent visits the Holocaust Museum to see for themselves the horror and injustice that result when law enforcement becomes a tool of oppression. This training carries through to every investigation. Agents adhere to federal statutes, the Attorney General guidelines, and most particularly to the Constitution. They use a range of investigative tools, as was the case in our hypothetical example. One primary tool is the National Security Letter, which has been the subject of debate in recent weeks. So let me take a moment to address the NSL issue, as we would call it. I am the first to admit that the FBI fell short in its compliance with the NSL statutes. And with the help of the Inspector General, we've identified what happened and how, and we have taken steps to correct it. I will also note that the Inspector General concluded that none of these violations were intentional, and furthermore, the Inspector General agreed with our assessment that NSLs, National Security Letters, are a critical investigative tool and that they have been invaluable to many national security investigations. And the NSLs, National Security Letters, are a good example of another built-in protection, and that protection is transparency. The FBI is subject to substantial oversight, both internally and externally, and more often than not, we are the first to identify our own mistakes. But if we do not identify them, we depend on the wider safety net of the Inspector General, the Congress, and the American public. It is to them that we are accountable, and it is from them that we receive substantial scrutiny. We welcome this scrutiny, painful though it sometimes is, because we understand that our ability to protect the American people depends in large part on the people's ability to trust the FBI. We are servants of the people and guardians of the Constitution, and there is not one FBI employee who bears this responsibility lightly. And what many people don't know is that we often go above and beyond what the law requires in order to fully protect our civil liberties. For example, we are well ahead of the curve in conducting privacy impact analyses for national security databases, not because we were required to, but because we take seriously our obligation to protect privacy. We have a Privacy and Civil Liberties unit at FBI headquarters. And this unit works to ensure that we have the right balance between, on the one hand, our operations and our civil liberty obligations on the other hand. Now, I spoke earlier about the current and emerging threat landscape, the intersection between crime, terrorism, between international plots and homegrown cells, between ancient hatreds and modern technology. The scope of these threats has led some to say that the FBI is not well equipped to do both law enforcement and intelligence. And these critics have called for a separate agency established along the lines of Britain's MI5. And while this system works well in Britain, it would be a mistake here in the United States. It would be a disservice to the American people. The FBI is uniquely situated within the American system to address these threats precisely because it is a national security agency with law enforcement powers. Some still think of the FBI as traditional crime fighters, and indeed, criminal investigations have been our bread and butter for almost 100 years. But every single agent will tell you that intelligence contributes to every investigation, from criminal to cyber to counterterrorism. And intelligence is nothing new to the Bureau. Intelligence is how we fought Nazi spies during World War II, Soviet espionage during the Cold War, and organized crime in the 70s and the 80s. And it is how we are fighting terrorism today. We have built on our foundation and adapted our intelligence capabilities so that we can target today's threats. Since September 11th, we have hired thousands of analysts and translators. We've established field intelligence groups in every one of our 56 field offices. And our agents and analysts work side by side in a joint facility with CIA and Department of Homeland Security personnel. We are fully integrated into the intelligence community under the Director of National Intelligence. Indeed, intelligence is now woven into every single investigation and operation, whether that be in Massachusetts or in Malaysia. We also cannot forget that terrorists operate at every level: local, regional, global. But so does the FBI. We have offices in nearly 60 foreign countries. We work side by side with our state, local, and international counterparts. We collaborate on cases that cross jurisdictional boundaries, whether those boundaries are state lines or international borders. Proponents of a separate intelligence agency see a dichotomy between intelligence operations and law enforcement operations. The reality is that the two functions are synergistic in the fight against terrorism. Because the FBI can do both, we can sit at one table and discuss the intelligence we are collecting, as well as what we should do with that intelligence. We can analyze whether it makes more sense to let an intelligence operation play out or to make arrests and begin prosecutions. Establishing a separate agency to collect intelligence and then pass it to law enforcement for action would be counterproductive. It is also worth noting that a separate intelligence agency would not possess the intrinsic responsibility to protect civil liberties that is part of the FBI's DNA. As President Kennedy pointed out in his speech 46 years ago, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. The FBI's mandate to uphold the Constitution and protect civil rights and civil liberties is not a burden. It is what makes us better. We understand the arguments of our critics because when it comes to civil liberties, we share common ground. Their job is to speak out because they believe deeply that our liberties are precious and must be guarded. So do we. Part of our job is to investigate violations of civil rights and civil liberties. But another part of our job is to protect lives. And these dual responsibilities make our job more complex and put us squarely in the middle of the national security and civil liberties debate. As we work together to strike the right balance, let us not underestimate the threat we face. We in the FBI would love nothing more than to reach the day when we could shut down our counterterrorism division. But the reality is that the terrorist threat will be with us for a long time to come. The FBI has a duty to protect you from those threats. And we and our partners are the last line of defense standing between America and the next September 11th. In his inaugural address, President John F. Kennedy said, "In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger." And he went on to say, "I do not shrink from the responsibility, I welcome it." We too do not shrink from the responsibility of defending freedom in its hour of danger. We welcome it. But like those before us, we understand that we will be judged by future generations on whether we succeed. History will determine not just whether we defeat terrorism, but also whether we safeguard the liberties for which we are fighting and maintain the trust of the American people. We know that if we win one struggle at the expense of the other, either way, we will have lost on both counts. In the fullness of time, I believe future generations will look back and judge that the FBI accomplished both missions. It is our duty, it is our calling, and more than that, it is our privilege to serve and to protect you. Thank you again for having me here today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Director Mueller. Now we come to the best part always of our forums, and that is the question and answer session. And as you're thinking about your question, let me just remind everyone that as Director Mueller pointed out when he was disrupted, that one of the great things about our democracy is our ability to debate issues that we care about, that we may disagree on. And here in the forum, we pride ourselves on being civil and being respectful. I'm disappointed that the students who interrupted Director Mueller didn't stay to ask their questions and express their concerns in a way that was civil and respectful. And I would urge all of you in asking your questions to remember to be civil and respectful, and also to keep your questions short, end with a question mark, and introduce yourselves. We will go from the mics on the floor to the loges. So would you begin?
Okay. Hi, my name
Hi.
is Reva Minkoff. I'm a junior at the college. Thank you so much for coming. And I guess I just had a question for you about torture. Obviously, 24, which is an incredibly popular show, uses torture a lot in all their counterterrorism methods to get information from prisoners. What's the FBI's, I mean, obviously the FBI says we don't use torture, we don't condone torture, but how much is that in practice? When do you think torture is permissible in terms of protecting civil liberties in the face of terrorism?
I must confess that I do not follow 24. But I will tell you that we have a protocol that we utilize and we follow, which precludes, in the course of any interviews, the use of coercion in any way, shape, or form, and we follow that. I can't speak to and will not speak to other areas except that utilizing the word torture, we quite obviously believe that it should not occur, and but we have followed our own protocols throughout.
Hello, Matthew Opitz. I'm a freshman at Harvard. And my question had to do with FBI monitoring of peace groups. MSNBC and many others have reported numerous instances of the FBI spying on peace groups such as Quaker Friends and Food Not Bombs in order to explicitly monitor not just suspect individuals, but also anti-war activity in general. So I was wondering how you would respond to people who see this as needless intimidation and hostility towards political dissent.
Well, I'll start off by not agreeing with the predicate of the question, regardless of the sourcing. We do not monitor peace groups. Allegations are often made that we do. Recently, several months ago, there was an allegation that in the run-up to the conventions, I think it was the New York convention, that we had illegally monitored persons who wanted to protest at the conventions. And the Inspector General did a study of that, investigated, and found that whatever efforts we took in that regard, and we did, there was adequate predication to believe that the individuals might contemplate violence. And so found that we did everything right in that circumstance. But we do not monitor, we do not follow, we do not investigate without adequate predication.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm a senior at the college. Thank you so much for being here. So you spoke a little bit about how your own organization tries to strike the appropriate balance between freedom and security, but obviously Congress plays an important role in creating federal statutes which regulate what your organization can do. And it's been several years since the Patriot Act was passed. I'm just curious, in your own opinion, if you put yourself in the shoes of, let's say, the Speaker of the House, in what ways would you give better leeway to your organization? In which ways do you think that the current laws don't allow you to do what's necessary to protect Americans? In which ways do you think the current law goes too far? Instances where you feel that you don't take advantage of what's given to you because you think it's simply too much freedom.
Well, That was a very short question requiring a very long answer if I answered all pieces of it. So let me start with the belief that the Patriot Act strikes the appropriate balance. The one thing that the Patriot Act did was break down the walls between the intelligence and the law enforcement community so that the information could be shared back and forth, which was absolutely essential in this day and age if we are to protect ourselves. Now there are areas, relatively few, in which I think the Congress should look at updating the laws. Particularly when it comes to the communications and the advance of digital technology, with cell phones, with voice over IP in the areas. The statutes were written a number of years ago address a different communication structure. And as we grow, the statutes need to be revised to address these new communications capabilities. So the biggest area that I think we will be looking at with Congress in the next several years would be in updating our FISA statute, for instance, to enable us to do more with regard to the accessibility to these new communications arenas. Periodically, there are areas where things become obstacles to the sharing of information. And without getting into the technicalities, because they're relatively small, there will be areas in which we'll be seeking legislation to remove some of those vestiges of the days prior to September 11th where there were inhibitions to the sharing of information. But as we talk about a balance, I talked mostly this evening about the balance that we tried to do in terms of our investigation, but clearly there are other mechanisms in striking that balance, Congress being the most obvious one. But I do believe, just to finish up on that, that the Patriot Act is an appropriate balance in terms of what it accomplished, enabling us to better do our job.
Hi, my name is Max Bazerman. I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School and a secondary appointment at the Kennedy School of Government. Thank you for what you do and your excellent comments about civil liberties and security. And I trust you. The question I want to ask is for guidance on how we're supposed to think about trusting others in the government when we've clearly been lied to by the Attorney General, when Robert McCollum destroyed the US case against the tobacco industry, and we've been lied to so many times about Iraq. How are we supposed to trust other parts of the government on this balance between civil liberties and security when the people are no longer trustworthy who are delivering those messages? Thank you for your answer in advance.
Well, there was a question in there, I know. And I can, and without getting, I don't want to adopt the predicate of the question, quite obviously. I can talk about the FBI and the balance that we tried to strike. But I think the government as a whole tries to strike that balance in various ways. And I appreciate that you trust us. And my hope is that we as an institution can maintain the trust of the American public, because only by doing so will we effectively accomplish what we need to do in both protecting the American public as well as assuring the continuance of the freedom that we have to speak our minds, to do what we will, without the constraints that you find in many other countries who face similar issues.
Shaloha. My name is Ari Cole, and I'm a physician from Hawaii and Massachusetts. And I agree with my colleague there. Thank you so much, Director. You all do a very, very hard job. I know as a physician, when you're in charge of lives, you only have one shot at it, and you're taking care of 300 million of us, and God bless you for all that you do.
Thank you, sir.
We can't say thank you enough. It's a very heavy cross you bear.
Now, I will tell you, I'm here to recruit as well. So.
Well, I do have a curriculum vitae. I'm a Kennedy student, and I'm interested in, I'm not worried about Big Brother, because I know that you guys have laws and you have ethics and morals, and you follow that, and there's lots of review. I'm interested in Little Brother. As we start having web devices and communicating over the internet ad nauseum, how can we protect our individual corporation interests, our laptop information, our cell phone communications, our text messages from our little brothers that may be eavesdropping on us? I know that you have a lot of information about listening to us as Big Brother, but how can we avoid our little brothers in the future with encryption? What do you see in the future for that, Mr. Director?
Well, thank you for focusing on one issue. I will say at the outset that I'm not saying for everybody to hands off the FBI. We should be subjected to scrutiny. And one of the reasons we send all of our agents to the Holocaust Museum is so they get a sense of what can happen if you are not subject to scrutiny and you do not have the control. So I am not saying trust forever. In fact, I want to say trust and verify, which is quoting from somebody else I know, but is accurate when it comes to us. In terms of spying on your cell phone, your BlackBerry or Blueberry or what have you, there are various levels that we all worry about. There are a number of persons who's trying to get our information, not the least of which are hackers, those who want to steal our identities. And we address it from the investigative point of view. We've got a number of agents, many more and recently, who are exceptionally astute at tracking down and putting behind bars those individuals who will steal those secrets. We also have a larger issue with regard to countries or terrorist groups who are either seeking to attack our infrastructure or gather our secrets, which is a substantial percentage of the work that we do on the national security side is preventing that from happening. But as the ability of persons to communicate across borders, to utilize the internet, jet travel, banking transactions, across borders, globalization. The more important it is that an institution, an agency like ours has the capability to transcend those borders in conducting those investigations on the various levels that I put out. Thank you.
God bless you.
And aloha.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Raul Prabhakar, and I'm a sophomore at Harvard College, and I'm from Long Island, New York, and thank you very much for coming tonight. Many have accused the FBI of a less than full investigation of the events prior to 9/11, especially those concerning the relationship between Al-Qaeda and Saudi Arabia. Are there any remaining questions that you feel require further investigation, and if so, what is the FBI doing about that?
No, there are no, bottom line is no. I do not believe that further investigation is necessary. Do not believe there was complicity between Al-Qaeda and the government of Saudi Arabia. Although 15 of the hijackers came from Saudi Arabia, the balance came from other countries in the Middle East. And I do believe that what happened before September 11th was thoroughly investigated by the 9/11 Commission. I think it did a superb report in summarizing the findings. I know with regard to the FBI, they had access to just about every piece of paper we had leading up to September 11th, and much the same can be said about the other agencies in the government. With regard to the FBI, we were also scrutinized by the Inspector General in terms of what we did right, what we did wrong, and how we could improve. And while there are a number of conspiracies out there and conspiracy theorists, I do not believe that any of those conspiracy theories are accurate, and that the 9/11 Commission did a superb job in its investigation and reached the right conclusions.
Yes.
Hi, Director Mueller. Thank you for coming. My name is Alex Lavoie. I'm a freshman from Connecticut, and I'm here at the college. I just have a quick question for you. You went to law school and worked in private law and in various different public law jobs before you rose to this position. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how young students can rise up into different positions in the intelligence community.
Well, you give me an opportunity, thank you very much for that question, to explain how great it is to work at the FBI or in public service, but particularly the FBI. I'll tell you, my advice to, you heard something about my background, my advice to people often is, we're looking at a career and want to do something. I think the military is a very good career. I learned a tremendous amount in there may be boos, moans and like, but I will tell you the military service was tremendous in terms of character building, giving you traits, habits, practices that you live with or you have with you the rest of your life, particularly when it comes to when you have to occupy a position of leadership. And then I would say that as students look at what they want to do in their lives, you ought to explore public service. I have bounced back and forth between public service and private practice. There are financial demands, kids' school, college, and the like. But I will tell you that persons who are in public service in some way, shape, or form treasure the opportunity to wake up every morning and do what you think is right for the country, for your institution. It is a freedom that quite often you do not necessarily have when it comes to working in more lucrative positions. So I would always encourage you to be open to the possibility of public service because the rewards are so great.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Tawfiq Rahim. I'm a first-year student here at the Kennedy School. Thank you for your remarks, and I welcome you also as a fellow Princeton graduate.
Well, there are two of us here.
Yeah, exactly. Don't beat me up afterwards, please.
If you were a Yankee fan, I'd have a problem. But
I'm a Blue Jays fan, so probably nobody cares. I wanted to raise another element to your equation of security versus liberty, and that is the civil liberties of the other, the immigrants, those outside America, citizens of other countries, including Canadian citizens, which I am one, such as Maher Arar, who was shipped off by the United States and tortured in Syria for a year, affirmed by the Canadian government, Human Rights Watch, and other organizations. And I wanted to ask you how this drive for security may breed insecurity, specifically instances like Guantanamo Bay, tens of thousands of people being detained, not even imprisoned, but detained in countries around the world, thousands of people being tortured or aggressively interrogated in Abu Ghraib, Bagram, Guantanamo Bay, often dying without notification to anyone, or illegitimate invasions of countries without any reason or international law justification. And so my question to you is, this drive for security, violating the civil liberties of others, whether it's kidnapping them or externally renditioning them, does that actually reaffirm security? Or do you think it actually exacerbates the threat and drives some people, or a lot of people, towards the terrorists? Thank you.
yeah, it was a little bit longer question.
A little bit too long.
A little bit longer
It's
question.
the Princeton influence.
I'm glad there's just two of us here. Let me just say that I understand the thrust of your question. I tell you, in this world, in this time, it is very difficult to balance civil liberties against security in a variety of ways, in a variety of levels. I can speak to what we try to do at the FBI. There are very difficult issues and questions about how our judicial system addresses terrorism. It's not like 20 or 30 years ago when you had persons in uniform. You had a country that would declare war. It is far different today, and globalization makes it different as well. And as we proceed, as globalization continues to break down the borders and to give individuals, not countries, the individuals the ability to undertake WMD attacks, such as we saw with anthrax. The steps that a country can take, needs to take, in order to protect its security against the protection of civil liberties is a very difficult issue to balance, and it requires open-mindedness, it requires dialogue, it requires debate, and an understanding that there is the balance that has to be made to protect, on the one hand, the security of our nation, and on the other hand, protect our civil liberties. It is not an easy question to answer.
My name is Vivek. I'm a senior, and again, I want to thank you very much for both being here and for the work that you do day in and day out. You've talked a lot today about the balancing that needs to be done between civil liberties and national security, between protection. My question is at what level this balancing should take place. Different people will inherently arrive at different conclusions as to what level of as to where this balance should be struck. Arguably, there's no absolute answers. It depends on competing sets of values. One could say that the FBI is tasked with protection of the American people, but not necessarily with the preservation of civil liberties in a way that might cause the FBI to arrive at a balance that is skewed towards the direction of security at the expense of civil liberties more so than a group that would be tasked with protecting civil liberties. So my question for you is, does it make more sense for there to be some sort of outside check on the security task organization to strike the balance, or is it sufficient for the FBI itself to determine what that balance really is?
No, as I say, the balance has to be struck at many levels. We have to strike a balance in just about every investigation we do that has that impact on civil liberties. We take a step in an investigation, we are impacting the privacy rights, the freedom of individuals, whether it be a criminal investigation or otherwise. And so at that level, we have to strike the balance day in and day out. But by the same token, Congress strikes the balance. Yes, we strike a balance, but I'm not saying we should do it in the dark. We do it with substantial input, oversight from Congress, from the privacy groups, from the ACLU, all of which I think is appropriate. And the debate has to be had. So I'm not saying that we are protected from scrutiny. We should not be protected from scrutiny, and that the balance has to be made at a variety of levels, in a variety of institutions, as a nation, as an agency, as the military, as the FBI, CIA, and the like, at various levels. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Najim Dos. I'm a first-year MPAD student at Kennedy School of Government. You were talking previously about the 9/11 conspiracy and the fact that you don't believe in it and all those things. And I wanted to ask you that me not being an American, I really have a hard time whom to trust. I don't really know who to trust because I've been hearing so many things. I've been reading so many things. I don't really know what the truth is. There are a number of questions, of course, tons of them. I can't ask them all. But rather, I would ask you for sources that you could refer me to that I could read furthermore and find answers to these questions. Starting from David Griffin's book after the 9/11 Commission report was written, from Alex Jones' movie Terrorism, where he has all these bunch of people, all these bunch of questions regarding the 9/11. Fahrenheit 9/11, the movie. The NYU professor, physics professor, is talking about the building's demolition of 9/11 and how he thinks the truth is different from what was written in the report or what is said in the media. And many others. The list is too long. I don't expect an answer, but maybe you can refer me to some sources.
Well,
Thank you.
You take the Kennedy assassination. It was almost 50 years ago. There were a spate. Whenever you have something such as 9/11 or the Kennedy assassination, you have a number of theories that abound afterwards. All I can tell you is that I am familiar with our investigation, which was extensive afterwards. It's the largest investigation that the FBI has undertaken. We undertook it, quite obviously, in New York with the Trade Center, out at Dulles, where some of the hijackers got on the planes, Boston, the Pentagon, the field in Pennsylvania, and internationally with our international counterparts. And I can tell you from our investigation, what was put in and made public in the 9/11 report is supported by the evidence. And to the extent that there are other theories out there, I have not seen any theory that has been supported by evidence such as we have seen to support the conclusions that were raised by the 9/11 Commission.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Will Rubin. I'm a freshman at the college. Thank you very much for coming here this evening. My question tonight is about the relationship between our nation's actions abroad and our security here at home. I'm wondering, has the war in Iraq made us more or less safe from terrorist attacks here at home? And more generally, what actions can our nation take abroad to make us safer here at home?
Well, I think that's a very difficult question to answer in terms of the impact of Iraq. I will say that on September 11th, we were in neither Afghanistan nor Iraq. Before September 11th, there were a series of attacks on American citizens around the world, the first American Trade Center, the Cole bombing, the East African bombings. We were in neither of those countries. And so it's hard to say that what impact Iraq will have had, given the track record of those who aspire to the philosophy or the ideology of bin Laden and al-Qaeda. With regard to how we can be more effective in preventing terrorism around the world, one of the most important areas and aspects is coordination with our counterparts and the exchange of information. I would say the world 15, 20 years ago of law enforcement and intelligence sharing internationally was bound up in a set of rules, extraditions, the evidence was handed according to the mutual legal assistance treaties and the like, with the globalization, with the speed of information flow across countries, with the importance of a telephone number or an email address. That information has to be exchanged very quickly with my counterpart in Morocco or Tunisia or Algeria or Spain or Denmark and the like. And for us to be successful in addressing terrorism, global terrorism, we have to have those relationships, we have to have that exchange of information, and we have to have the trust in the handling of that information with our counterparts. And that is the future. And it's not just in the war on terrorism. It's trafficking in persons. It's child pornography on the internet. The threats we face today are international threats. And no longer can we look. The Bureau was started almost 100 years ago because of the advance of technology. The bank robbers all of a sudden had use of an automobile to leave a particular city and cross county lines and state lines, thus the FBI to cross those jurisdictional boundaries. In the future, we have to work very closely with our counterparts overseas to do investigations together, exchange information, if we are to be able to protect against these international threats that have become our way of our daily fare.
Yes.
Hi, Director Mueller. My name is Andrew Prokop. I'm a junior at the college. My question's about warrantless wiretapping. Leaving aside the question of whether the general practice of warrantless wiretapping violates the Bill of Rights, it seems clear that FISA does make it illegal for the US government to engage in warrantless wiretapping. So my question is, do you believe that the president has the power to authorize the FBI to engage in conduct specifically prohibited by Congress? And if not, what happened?
Well, I'm not, again, there were some suppositions in your question that I'm not certain I would agree with, but I believe you're talking about the NSA program. I will tell you, I'm going to leave discussion of that to others. I will tell you from the Bureau's point of view, from the Bureau's point of view, whenever we use a wiretap in the United States, it is pursuant to, in a national security case, it's pursuant to a FISA court order.
We'll do a final round. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, my name is Shoaib Riyas, and I'm an exchange scholar at Harvard. I understand that FBI has legitimate security concerns. But at the same time, me being somebody of brown color, I cannot help but sort of, see that all eyes are focused toward people who are Arab-looking or Muslim-looking or South Asian in general. As a matter of fact, in this room right now, I feel like all agents are looking at me, and I don't want to make any unnatural move, that some might, jump on me and nail me down.
Don't worry, not to worry.
Well, I mean, so
I know what you're saying, but
yeah, I mean, you see that at airports, you see that, basically everywhere around you. Some academics have called this virtual internment, that there's constant surveillance around us, and we virtually feel that we are interned in this country. How can you address the sorts of concerns? I mean, we are constantly living under the threat of these false positives that, we might be shipped off to Guantanamo Bay for having, I don't know, done something amazingly, doodling, basicly. So how do you address?
I'd have to disagree with that characterization, but I will tell you that terrorists come in a variety of ways. We do not look at color. We do not look at other such areas. Terrorists, one would say, well, most terrorists are males. The fact of the matter is there's increasing utilization of females as suicide bombers around the world. And from our perspective, it is a false trail if you focus on a color or some identifier along those lines.
Yes.
My name is Kavori Kariuki. I'm a Mason Fellow here at the Kennedy School of Government. Given the global outrage to some of the actions that, Mr. Director, you have taken, and this country as a whole has taken in the war on terrorism, there has been basically a divergence from international customary law, which other nations really respect. In the next 10, 15 years, at the rate at which the world is integrating, I see that the U.S. will soon be a co-signatory on the International Court of Justice. Do you see yourself in 10, 15 years, submitting yourself to the International Court of Justice to be held accountable for some of the actions that you've taken in office?
Well, I have not followed. I know there's a debate on whether or not we should participate in the International Court of Justice, and I have not followed the arguments pro or con, so I really can't give you a definitive answer in that regard. I know there are concerns about the perception of whether it be our military or others being wrongfully prosecuted politically in a court over which we have no control. But I have not followed that debate, and I don't know where we'll be 5 or 10 years down the road. I will tell you that, yes, the world is getting smaller. Yes, that as the world gets smaller, it is our relationships with our counterparts around the world that are absolutely essential to working together to face the threats that all countries face in this day and age, whether it be terrorism or cybercrime or identity theft or trafficking in persons. So I don't know where we'll be, the bottom line, in terms of that particular international entity 5 or 10 years down the road. Sir?
Hi, my name is Colt Hagmeyer. I'm actually an employee of Harvard and a fellow UVA alum. So my question is, after September 11th, when the Bureau took the focus onto terrorism, do you feel that diverted resources from other types of crime, such as, I don't know, interstate crime, bank robbery, serial offenders, or violent crime?
Yes. We had to, in the wake of September 11th, it was quite clear that our #1 priority had to be counterterrorism. And beyond just making it a priority, we had to put the resources there in terms of agents and analysts and professional staff. We probably moved close to 2,000 agents from the criminal programs over to counterterrorism since September 11th, which has meant that we have had to prioritize on the criminal side. We moved agents from doing drug cases over to counterterrorism, where state and local law enforcement can effectively and efficiently do bank robberies. We're doing fewer bank robberies, and we have prioritized. And our priorities on the criminal side have been public corruption, because if we do not do it, often it is not addressed. Civil rights violations, because if we do not do it, often it is unaddressed. International organized crime, transnational organized crime, because it's cross-jurisdictional and we have the capability of addressing it. White-collar crime, large white-collar crime, Enron, Health South, Quest recently. A number of the cases have to be addressed. And most recently, but also established after September 11th, was focused on violent crime. And so we've had to prioritize, and my hope is that as we go along in the next few budget cycles, that with the uptick in violent crime, that there will be an augmentation of the Bureau to address some of the challenges we have on the criminal side of the house. We cannot afford still to take our eye off off of counterterrorism.
Final question.
My name is Hassan Chowdhury. I'm an MPA student here and MBA student at MIT Sloan. Thank you, Director, for coming. My question is, what's your assessment of the relationship of the FBI with the American Muslim community? And I ask that question in particular context of the cooperation of the information that you feel that you're receiving from that community or lack thereof. I also ask it in the context that whether justified or not, it is a community which does feel under siege. And whilst a lot of it might be hyperbole, it doesn't take a lot to scare a civilian population into over-imagining the threats that are posed to it. In the current state, is that a limitation on your security endeavors, and how does that reflect on that community?
Well, yeah, I tell you, since September 11th, we have had tremendous support from the Muslim American, Arab American, Sikh American communities. And it is absolutely essential that we receive that support. We, for our part, have had substantial outreach programs in every one of our field offices to the Muslim community. We have a continuous dialogue. And I, at the national level, at least every 3 or 4 months, sit down with Muslim leaders to see how we can do a better job. The worst thing that happened the worst thing that occurred for the Muslim community was September 11th. What would be even worse is another September 11th, in which Muslims were somehow implicated. And I think we both recognize that. And so we have to work together. But I will tell you, the Muslim Americans, Sikh Americans, Arab American that we intersect with and the communities that we work with are every bit American as the rest of us, and feel every bit as concerned about terrorism as an American, regardless of their origin, and have been open their arms to us and are working well with us. We are a community of immigrants, basically, and as a community of immigrants, I think we all understand that we have to contribute as a country, as a nation, regardless of our backgrounds, to the security, but also at the same time balancing protecting the civil liberties. And we have had a very good, as I say, relationship with the Muslim community. We hope to expand on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Let me finish by saying that it's great to be back here, particularly when the Red Sox are in first place. I don't like to come in September or October after they've slipped it a little bit. But it's also great to be back at Harvard, and it's tremendously useful to have a dialogue along these lines. And I do want to make a final plea for those of you who are looking for occupations down the road to think about public service, but also think about the FBI. Thank you for having me.